Welcome to our Sunrise Project podcast. We are glad to have you join us today. We're here with Dorothy and me, Gabby, and we're going to dive into a conversation together about our history as a Sundown Town. And this is a little bit of a different kind of format that we're taking on, but it still is about process. So we have shared this in previous podcasts. We love process, and this history of our Sundown Town is still about that process, where we've been, where we are today, and where we can go. So we're kind of use this time to dive into where we've been. And I wanted to start that time with a quote that we have used quite a bit in the Grants Pass Remembrance Coalition. It is by Pumla Godoba Makizela, and she is a part of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And this is a quote from her. "But if memory is kept alive in order to transcend hateful emotions, then remembering can be healing." That is what we are doing. Remembering to heal.
Remembering and healing, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. So first off, we talked about this earlier. We're not historians. We are not experts.
We are not, no.
We are not experts. But this is our community, and we love it, and we can learn about it. And
we don't have to be experts to talk about it. Part of what we are trying to do here with Grants Pass Remembrance is sort of break down the barriers to conversations about the difficult topic of our racial history. And so we are going to be modeling that for you today.
Yes.
Is talking about things that we are not experts, but we are immersed in this town. We love Grants Pass, and we want to have these conversations.
Yes. Yes. So, how did you first hear about Grants Pass's history as a Sundown Town, Dorothy?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I can pinpoint it pretty accurately, I think, because it was when the speaking tour going around Oregon came to Grants Pass in September of 2014, called "Why Aren't There More Black People in Oregon? A Hidden History." And I was unable to attend that event, but I was really intrigued by hearing about it. And I had some different reactions to hearing about it. I was very curious. I was also a little frightened by it, or anxious or intimidated by it, because I wasn't sure what I would find out about myself if I dug very deeply into it. But that was, I had never heard of a Sundown Town before then. That was the first time I had heard that phrase. And the notion that Black people could come into town during the day to do jobs but had to be gone by sundown was a brand new concept to me.
Yeah.
And I think that after that exposure, just to that one title, right, that really kind of caught my interest. I mean, I grew up in a very integrated community in Chicago, and it really kind of put in stark relief between where I'm living now and where I grew up. It got me thinking about that issue quite a bit more, but not talking about it because it's so hard to talk about it. So when Grants Pass Remembrance came along, and I was able to get involved with something that was more ongoing rather than a one-time event, and build some relationships and practice having conversations on a regular basis, that very much changed the way I engaged with that question of why there aren't more Black people in Oregon.
Yeah.
So how about you, Gabby?
Yeah. I think I've shared this story before, but we had talked about the emotions around it, which I hadn't dug into a bit as much. So I first heard about it when I think I'd been in town for about 2 months or so, and someone, I don't even know how it came up, but someone asked if I knew about the curfew sign that used to be on the bridge, and what curfew sign, and and they shared it. I believe I don't know what they shared what it said, or if they just shared, it was to make sure that Black people weren't, were out of town by sundown. And, my brother was going to be coming to visit. And so I did a double take because I wanted to know, my brother's multi-ethnic, and I wanted to know, would he feel welcomed in this community? So there was my initial reactions around emotion were very centered on kind of an event that would happen soon. My brother was going to come and visit. I wanted him to feel welcome in the place that I live, and that really mattered to me. As I've done reflecting in the past, it was kind of contained in some ways, but in our talking, we'd done talking a bit more about the emotions that we all experience when this history comes up. And as I thought about it more, I realized that I think hearing that information brought conflicted emotions around my connection and engagement and kind of ownership of this being my community and loving Grants Pass. It's been a process for me to which is kind of strange because it implies that I had some kind of idea somewhere that I can only love this place if it's perfect, which doesn't make any sense. But that still existed somewhere in my head, this idea that only if it's beautiful and great and wonderful can I love this place. And so it's been such an interesting process to reflect on my own process of it. It has been a story of saying to myself, no, I love this place. I love my neighbors. I love so many different things about this place. And there's a tension there. There are elements about this that really matter to me and are really hard. And how do I hold all of that while I still love this place? And it has been an engagement that I'm so thankful to have to get to be a part of, growing into loving a place with all that it is and all that it has, in the same way that we love people. I mean, I have people that I love in my life that none of them are perfect,
And when you talk about that, it makes me think about just my own self, that sometimes I think I can't be loved unless I am perfect.
Yes.
And letting go of that and
Yes.
seeing the broken and the beautiful in a place, in each other, and in myself
Yes.
is really very freeing and takes us to a deeper level of love, I think, that is... that's just a place I want to get to in all aspects of my life.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah. I am thankful for this. I'm thankful that I got introduced to the idea at the beginning, and it has shifted my process. That I am, I think there are people that have been here for a long time and then find out, or it's a different process for all of us. Mm-hmm. That engagement. Now, speaking of process, there's also a process of what history we're hearing about. So what has that been like for you? What have you learned about our history since? It started with that little bit, and we have been engaging in this history and research. How has that changed along the way? What have you learned? Has that shifted how you understand our history at all? Or what's been impactful in that process?
Well, I've learned quite a bit since starting to engage with Grants Pass Remembrance. We do a lot of oral history collection, both among our neighbors who are with us now and also through reading records of past newspaper articles or books of interviews and that sort of thing. There is a particular book called In Timber Country by Beverly A. Brown that is a source of a lot of oral history quotes from this region. And I think I'll just share one snippet that I found in there that brings up a point that I'd like to talk about. So this was a white Grants Pass resident who moved to Oregon with her family in 1951. And she said there were no black people at all in town. And some of the things she remembered hearing as a child was, no, they can't stay in Grants Pass overnight. They have to be out of town by the time it gets dark. And then her comment was, I don't know how much truth there was to that, but I heard it a lot, and I took it as the truth. And I think that is part of the important process of oral history, is that we can get fixated on a debate about whether there was a Sundown Town on the Caveman Bridge or not. Mm-hmm. But the important point is that it was spoken, that people heard it. It was presented to them as the truth, and they took it as the truth. And that created a climate, whether sign or no sign, where people of color did not feel comfortable stopping in Grants Pass when they came through Southern Oregon.
Yeah, that brings up another quote that had stood out to me that I wanted to share. And this was a white former Grants Pass resident. They'd moved since, but it said, I didn't understand sundown laws, and I didn't realize Grants Pass was like that till I left. I got to rapping with some black guys that was my age or older, and they said, hey man, we heard about that place. And I said, what about it? Hey, people like us ain't welcome there. And that really struck me, the reputation that this isn't just our history. It's not a contained thing. It's a history that other people know us as. It's not just that we know as a part of ourselves, but we are known by that.
Yes, and what do we want our reputation to be?
Yeah.
I think we've both heard a mutual friend who is a young black man say that when he talks about coming down to travel in Southern Oregon, yes, his black friends ask him two questions. Mm-hmm. How many people are you going with? Mm-hmm. And are you going to be carrying a weapon?
Yeah.
Because it is perceived that to this day, it is not safe for black people in our town. And that's just heartbreaking. That is something that is not set in stone, that, history kind of flows. It is part of our history, and we are part of the history of the future, and how we respond to that and how we engage in it determines how Grants Pass will be known into the future. And that's something exciting to work on for this place that I've been in for over a decade now, and I am very proud to call my home here, and that I love so many things about our community, and I would love to work on making us more welcoming to people of color so that reputation, whether or not it's deserved, we could debate that, but that reputation changes as we move into the future.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much hope. Mm-hmm. There's so much hope. Yeah. It reminds me of, we don't have this oral history written down, but a story that I just heard recently about a gentleman who was passing through Grants Pass, and his car broke down. He's a young black man. And so he was working on it, and noticed that people were watching him in a different kind of way, and kind of coming close and checking to see if he was stealing the car or not. And just these pieces of, it's so easy for us to not realize the ways we treat people differently. Mm-hmm. And it's not just our history, it is also our present. But are there other quotes that you'd like to share around our...
Well, I think you just led me into another one. And this is from Robert L. Jackson, a Black former Grants Pass resident who wrote a book called Racism in America, My Personal Stories and Insights. And he talks about some of his experiences in Grants Pass after having lived in the American South. So he said, even in the South, I don't recall people scrutinizing me like an otherworldly alien. The jury was still out concerning the scope and depth of white racism in Grants Pass, but one thing for sure, my new town certainly didn't feel like home. Mm-hmm. And that notion of being scrutinized like an otherworldly alien, when people of color are such a rare sight in a given community, it is hard to be welcoming. You see something that looks out of the ordinary and you kind of do a double take, you may stare, you may walk up to be friendly and start asking them awkward questions like, how does it feel to be Black in Grants Pass, things that do not feel welcoming at all to the person on the receiving end of it, but that are well meant.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is really important that we not demonize each other and not demonize our history, but just look at it, hold it, try to learn more about it, and not try to fix it too fast, but to really be in process. You talked about process before, but be in process where we take this phase of time right now to learn as much as we can and talk about it as much as we can to other people, and then observe how it develops, not as an initiative of one or two people who decide what the right solution is, but something that develops organically. What are we going to do as a community in response to this?
Yeah. That quote in your sharing, bring up some other quotes, just because let's bring some more in here.
Yes, let's.
I'm so struck by this home piece. He'd mentioned the it certainly didn't feel like home, and there's some other. Oh, here it is. My experiences are more good than not, though it doesn't feel like this is my home or my community yet. So that element of how can we look at our history in such a way, be aware of this is a part of who we are, so that when we see somebody that looks different than us, when we're talking to our white neighbors at this moment, because we have a lot of neighbors that are neighbors of color, but that our first thought isn't, oh wow, they're here, or like this nonverbal communication of staring, of having some kind of inner rhetoric, but we've already taken care of the inner rhetoric. We have already addressed that, so that when we see a person, whatever the color of their skin, we can say, "Hi, how are you doing?" We can smile. We can be ready for that. I think it's the getting ready for it that can be hard to do. We sit with emotions that are hard to sit with, but it helps us get ready for just being welcoming. And we're pretty good at that. Like we have a friend that comes into town that's a Black man that talks about how this is a friendly town. People are pretty friendly. Like let's keep that up. Like we know how to do this thing.
Yes, let's reinforce the beautiful without turning a blind eye to the broken.
Yeah.
And one thing that this actually brings me to something else that has come up through my work with Pass Remembrance, my involvement with engaging with other people like yourself in this process, is that sometimes in the broken, you find really beautiful moments.
Oh my, yes.
And so you can't separate them apart from each other. If you try to hide what's broken about your history, you lose that opportunity to notice some really beautiful things that happened right alongside the brokenness.
Yeah.
And so I want to share another quote, which is from a white Grants Pass resident who is talking about her father-in-law, who was a lifelong Grants Pass resident. And he talked about the Harlem Globetrotters coming to visit Grants Pass in the late 60s. And the Baptist church he attended was discussing how this would affect the community and where they would stay. So her father-in-law volunteered to transport them to a place they could stay outside of city limits, which is now Merlin, to make sure they were safe. And they stayed several days, and he transported them in and out of town for the event. And there were a number of people who had concerns about how this would affect his reputation. But ultimately, he decided the only opinion he valued was God's. And that, to me, is a beautiful moment alongside the broken, that there is peer pressure to be exclusionary, but you look deep inside and you find that that's not who you are, and you find the courage to do something proactive to help make the stay easier for these entertainers who are displaying the courage to come here in the first place.
Yeah.
And so that was just one story I picked out of a collection. There are numerous stories of Black entertainers coming to visit in the mid to late 20th century who had to be escorted out of town at night, and people who really extended themselves to make sure that there weren't any uncomfortable or even violent incidents.
Yeah, yeah. That element of if we don't look at history that's hard, we're going to miss out on history that's also beautiful and hopeful and courageous. We're going to miss out on some really precious pieces. This is another story that that kind of brings up the same kind of idea. Back in the early 70s, I remember there was one Black family that lived on Lower Grave Creek Road. Occasionally, unscrupulous people would drive by and shoot at their home. When some of the neighbors heard of this, a small group gathered together and built a large dirt berm between the road and their home to provide protection for them. There's this piece of neighbors responding to neighbors.
Yes.
And there's an element of this that I think we're still doing of we might not have people shooting at other people. But when we listen to the experiences of our neighbors of color and ones that we read just a bit ago that are collected in the last 10 years, I believe that this happens. We gather and say, we can do something about that.
I love the image of that berm because I grew up in the Midwest where the rivers would flood periodically, and you'd have these community gatherings where everybody would bring sandbags to gather together and as a community protect the community from the rising waters. Yeah. And this feels like this, building this berm was not a one neighbor project. This sounds like the community coming together and building this structure to protect this family who was this neighbor that they cherished simply because they were neighbors. And so it has some of that feel that I think a lot of people can relate to of responding to something like a natural disaster of like, this thing is happening, it's not your fault, and we're going to do what we can to help protect you because we know that you would do the same for us.
Yeah. I feel like we can't talk about the broken and the beautiful or the beautiful of that's in that broken without mentioning the 95 rally.
Yes.
I mean, that was...
We love the 95 rally.
Yes. That was... So I had been researching Oregon history, Grants Pass specifically, history for a bit before I heard about the 95 rally. And it just astounded me that I'd been talking to people and asking questions about, Are you familiar with our history? And that it took me so long to find out about it, and that it wasn't something that was also within our, this is a part of who we are.
So do you want to do a couple sentence brief description?
I was thinking about that. Do you want to?
All right, I will, since you offered. So the group, the Aryan Nations, was looking to set up Josephine County as a center for organizing efforts in the Northwest. And the city of Grants Pass, and really Josephine County as a whole, came together in a rally at the Josephine County Courthouse in February of 1995. And it was people of different religions, it was people of different races, it was people of different ages, it was people of different economic statuses, really all coming together and saying, this is not who we are. We do not want racist organizing here. And the initiative was dropped by the Aryan Nations, and our community stood up together and said no to hatred and racism. And there was I wrote down something about that. Oh, the mayor at the time, Gordon Anderson, said, "How great is it to see so many residents of Josephine County willing to stand up against those who would create fear and violence." And there was a member of the sheriff's department who had been with the sheriff for since the early 80s, who said it was the largest rally he had seen in his 14-year career.
Yeah.
And then that becomes part of our history too.
Yes.
And it is that's a beautiful part of our history, and it weaves in together with all the broken parts in order to make the whole picture, which is what we're looking for.
Yes. This brought up an interesting angle on the broken and beautiful that I don't think I've connected into before, but there was feedback we had a Martin Luther King Jr. gathering at the Performing Arts Center in January, and there will be another one next year. And a part of that time was sharing these quotes, this oral history that has been gathered. And it took us, from the 20s slowly on through current day. And after that time, we had a moment where we asked people, choose one word to describe how you're feeling and share that with your neighbor, and then share with your neighbor why you chose that word. And we got some feedback afterwards from someone that had been a part of that process. And she'd shared, when you asked us to do that, my word, I turned to my neighbor and my word was ashamed. And she turned to me and she said, hopeful. And she was a Black woman. And there's this piece of broken and beautiful that something that might be broken to one person, like it was a broken experience for that woman to hear the history. But for this other woman to hear that history, that was full of hope, and there's a beauty in that. And sometimes if we try to push aside something, we don't know what we're doing for our neighbor, and if we're squashing hope in the process of not wanting to sit with discomfort. That experience has so struck me. It's one that I find myself sharing a lot.
Part of feeling that I'm at home somewhere or feeling that I belong somewhere is feeling heard. Yes. And from what you're saying, I'm kind of making the connection that remembering the broken parts of our history allows some of our neighbors to feel more heard than if we ignore those parts of our history.
That is exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost want to sit there for a minute. It's so it. Are there any other quotes that are coming up for you? Or shall we maybe wrap this up soon, because we have a goal to have this be a shorter podcast so that it can be more easily accessible in getting our history out there. So yeah, I
will do a closing thought and then invite you to do a closing thought. So my closing thought is that part of the joy of working in Grants Pass Remembrance has to do with engaging with people who are different from me. Mm-hmm. And you and I have similar personalities, but we have different religious beliefs and we have different political outlooks, and we can both be clear about that and share it and not have it get in the way of the joyous connection that we have between ourselves. Mm-hmm. And this opportunity to engage with people that I would not ordinarily engage with in my own community is a big benefit of the work we're doing. And it brings me to a quote that we use often at coalition meetings, which is from an African proverb, and we haven't been able to get any more specific than that. But if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I'm hoping we get to go very far in this work, and it means going together, really together, deeply together, even if that means going a little more slowly than I might have if I kind of rushed in with my, superhero cape to try to fix everything on my own. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's my closing thought. How about you, Gabby?
It's beautiful. I just wanted to say that the words enriching comes up. I feel like the going together with all of our differences, and there are some differences that for different people it's going to be more of a stretch to hold space for that, but it's such an enriching process, not just for that whole picture but also personally. Mm-hmm. I think I just want to repeat that thing that we kind of stumbled on right before was. And I might even ask you to see if you could quote yourself again. That's the thing I want to land on. Would you? That it was that piece of the feeling heard, our neighbors feeling heard, that when we listen to this history and we make space for it as a part of us, as a part of our history, as we normalize talking about it, there is a way in which our neighbors can feel heard that is so worth it, is just so worth it. There. Would you add anything to that, or is that?
I think you got it pretty right on. Just that embracing the broken aspects of our history can allow some of our neighbors to feel more heard and more welcome and more like this is a place that feels like home.
Yes. Yes. Dorothy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabby. It's been a pleasure.
It is. And thank you. And I want to say a thank you to the Hive. The Hive is the space where this magic happens, where we get to do this podcast and gather. And it is a pretty awesome space in our community. So come by the Hive sometime and check it out. They've got a downstairs and an upstairs, and it's a pretty sweet space. So thank you to the Hive. Yeah.
Thank you, Hive.
Yay.